Hello, everybody, and welcome to a Halloween episode of Character Gallery with your host, Matt, here at the Japanese Train, and of course, joined here by MasterOfTheLemons, aka Lemmy.
And today we're going to be talking about... Well, we actually went back and forth on who we should do for this because there's not really any Halloween characters. Like, you could say, like, we could do one on the Ghost Engine, or, like in Ghost Train or something like that, which could be really cool. But, we kind of wanted to go with somebody who was a little bit better established. And we decided on Bertram because I think he's kind of the most Halloween-centric character out of all of them that you could really...
He's definitely very mysterious, and he's got this aura of being threatening, I guess.
Threatening? We're off to...
At least to Toby's imagination. I'm sure Bertram pops up in Toby's nightmares every now and then.
I think Bertram will be interesting to talk about because he's... We only see him for a split second. And in fact, Matt and I are we're kind of scrounging up any amount of information we can get on him. Like I've got out the Wooden Railway character card for Bertram. We've both got out the trading card series character card for Bertram. So we're going to read both of those and kind of go into what little we know about him because he never even speaks in the show. I mean, we know so little about him. You want to go ahead and read one of those, Matt?
Sure. Here, why don't you start with the Wooden Railway card?
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and do that. All right. Bertram. Bertram, also known as the Old Warrior because of his bravery, works hard hauling scrap metal around the island of Sodor, so... Okay.
He's taking scrap to Brendan, is he?
I don't know what they're picturing when they write these things. Like, where could Bertram possibly... What line could he possibly be using that allows him to go all around the island of Sodor?
The main line.
Oh, no! Is he standard gauge? Is he... If he was right next to Duke, would he be the exact same shape, but just scaled up severely?
I don't like that. Keep reading. I want to forget that image.
Let me finish this description. So apparently he does work hard hauling scrap metal around the island of Sodor, so it can be molded into new cars, trains, and other useful things. I'm actually very glad I read this, because I totally forgot, and this is really a big thing about Bertram, is that, in Wooden Railway, he's associated with this idea of carrying scrap around, he works for the scrap company. So maybe Matt and I were talking about this before we started, where we have no idea where Bertram works, right? Like almost every other character in the show, we know where they work, or at least where they could work, right? Like any other narrow gauge engine that got introduced, it's like, excluding like Millie, who works at Ulfstead Castle. Everybody just works on the Skarloey Railway. It's simple. It makes sense. Like, there's no further explanation required.
Right.
But, like, Bertram, he works on this old abandoned line that, like, isn't running anymore, but he's still there somehow for some reason, and it's being restored, so the engines don't work here anymore. It's dying to have a story
written about it.
It really is. Like, I've always found that really unsettling in a cool way, where it's like, the way they word it, where they're like, this line used to be worked by the little engines, and it's like, it's just so, it gives you chills, or it's like, and I never thought, like, the little engines from the Skarloey Railway. I always thought, like, this was another railway entirely that just was first brought up in this episode that Bertram worked on. And so I was like, I always wanted to know more about this railway that he worked on, but we never knew anything about it.
Well, hopefully his character card will tell us some more. So, his character card says the following. First off, it doesn't say anything about scrap.
I think Wooden Railway, that's one of those weird things that Wooden Railway just made up.
Yeah.
They just saddled some of the narrow gauge engines with these total just lies of what they did. Like, they just made Ivo Hugh the zoo engine.
Here, Aeneas, take some rock crusher cars. So, it says here that Bertram lives on a remote part of the island that once was very rarely visited. That's interesting. Toby discovered Bertram when he had to stay to guard the mine and castle, which were being restored to accommodate visitors. At first, Toby thought Bertram was a ghost. Now they are good friends and are responsible for getting passengers to and from these new tourist attractions. They're saying here that Bertram takes passengers to the mine and castle now.
Did tracks run through all those places? That's really unsettling that Toby went past both of those locations. Like that Bertram could have been watching Toby from the shadows if he wanted.
How do we know Bertram wasn't?
He could have been. He could have been behind bushes or something.
He's plotting to take Toby down.
Yeah. Oh my god.
Toby was right all along.
I legitimately, I brought this up in Top 10s with Multi, the Halloween episode we did, is I brought up the fact that, what if the reason that the railway closed down and all the engines are no more, in Bertram's called the Old Warrior, what if he legitimately killed all the other engines? And he's like the only one who's still around because he got all of them. And that's why he's the scrap engine, too. It's like...
He's hauling their carcasses around.
Yes. I mean, wouldn't that be just so awful if it's like Bertram was the one tasked with taking them to the scrapyard and then moving the remains and taking them to wherever. Like maybe it could be that, because I know there were lines on the Mid-Sodor that ran down to the harbor. Could be that he worked on the Mid-Sodor maybe and then took the scrap down to the harbor or something.
Yeah, I don't like the idea of Bertram working on the Mid-Sodor.
I don't either. Thing is, here's the thing. It's a big deal to do, but I think I might be comfortable with creating a third narrow gauge railway on the island that is there specifically to justify the existence of Bertram.
I mean, when you think about it, there are lines. I mean, even if you want to talk about industrial factories and whatnot, there are factories that will have a single engine.
That's true.
Does its thing.
And that kind of seems like what Bertram does, honestly. Especially if he works for a scrap company.
Or if we're talking about the mine, he was discovered at the mine.
Yeah, that's true. The thing is, the problem is that the railway was worked by the little engines. So I'm thinking at least 3. Maybe Bertram was one of them. And I'm picturing that these are characters we've never seen before. It could be that the other 2 engines are those 2 magazine characters, Sydney and Little Barford. Maybe there's a network of narrow gauge lines kind of near Duck's Branch Line. Because I know that, I don't remember which one it was. Sydney was his
Sydney
line
works alongside a small stretch of the Little Western.
Yeah.
And Little Barford works at Cloud Factory, I want to say.
Yeah, no, he does. He works at the Cloud Factory. I don't know.
Oh, he's on the Cloud.
Yeah, he's on the Cloud. I don't
He works for Apple.
He works at the Genius Bar.
God. Hey, I'll help you get your iPhone on the Cloud. Oh, thanks, Little Barford. Well, anyway, because this isn't a Little Barford episode.
No, it's not. We'll get to that eventually.
I definitely want to talk about his personality because there's so little to go on, but I also have a vibe. I picture Bertram, probably because he never said anything in the episode, I almost see him as kind of mute. I see several interpretations. One of them is that he's mute.
Yeah, that's the thing. I also view him very much I don't see him as totally mute, but what I do see is I think he'd have kind of a deeper, more gravelly voice. And I think that he speaks almost like a war veteran with some level of shell shock. I feel like Bertram's past has something really serious in it. And I feel like he's called the Old Warrior for a reason. He's gone through something that is rather significant. Yeah?
I had a good idea.
What?
It's just an idea that I only just came up with, but it sounds cool.
What? What is it?
If the Duke went away to the war and died in the war, what if Bertram was in the First World War because Britain sent engines over to France? They had engines go over to France and they ran in between the trenches.
Because I was honestly thinking, I was kind of picturing Bertram as a war veteran, but I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. How could that be? But that's actually, because wasn't Stanley's class?
Stanley was built for the war.
And I think that Stanley himself was he was some sort of surplus or something. So that's why he ended up on the Mid-Sodor. That's really, I really love that interpretation of Bertram. Because I think I'm pretty settled on the idea that the railway on Sodor on which he works is independent of the Mid-Sodor and the Skarloey Railway. It's a third railway.
Yeah.
And I don't know exactly where it is. I'm kind of picturing somewhere along Duck's branch line, just so that we can kind of tie in the other two magazine characters, because I know Sydney works nearby there. Bertram would be a really interesting character then, especially if you were to juxtapose him with those two, because they seem like they're fairly lighthearted. And I think Bertram would have this really serious war history.
It shows how, because I'm sure that Duke, finding out that the Duke died in the war was like a lot to him, but he never went over there.
Yeah, exactly. And I would love to see Bertram and Duke meet. Like, Duke can follow all of his little rules all he wants, but he's still not actually suffered for anything. He hasn't actually made serious sacrifices. Bertram has. Bertram has actually been through it. He doesn't just order people around and say, oh, that would never suit his grace. Bertram is forced to have that discipline. Bertram doesn't have it just as a principle. He doesn't get to decide to be disciplined. He just is. He has to be.
I think that there's a strength in Bertram that, we have enough about the character to put him into these really awesome situations. Like, there's just as much validity as, like, Enterprising's interpretation of Bertram.
Yeah, I definitely love what he does with Bertram. It's very different from how I perceive Bertram, because I see him as kind of a... Bertram doesn't really talk a lot, and when he does...
I see him as gritty and dark.
Yeah, honestly. Like,
depressing.
I see Bertram... Yeah.
Maybe that's just my inner cynicism, my own demons, but,
And I just see Bertram that way, because he's called the Old Warrior, right? And he's the fact that he could be intimidating enough that engines would think that he's going to come hunt them down... He has to be like somewhat intimidating. He couldn't just be...
I think I might have to write something about Bertram now. Like, I'm getting jazzed about this.
This is always what happens. Like, we talk about a character, and then you're like, ooh, I love Daisy now. Let's talk about...
This is why we do this series, Lemmy. I'm telling you.
Yeah, no. That's the whole point of it. It's like, it's supposed to get us excited for these characters. And in Bertram, this is an especially fun one to do, because... it's not just us kind of regurgitating the same stuff we've talked about for years. It's actually us kind of coming up with a new idea in real time. And so it's like, kind of brainstorming Bertram. Because a lot of what Matt and I say on this show isn't fact. In fact, most of it isn't. It's just kind of our opinions on the characters and ideas that we made up ourselves.
They're
that we think
based
would be
on the
fun.
stories, and they're based on the engines, but, when it comes to things that either have not happened or holes that we have to fill in, it's entirely based on our interpretation, and that's what it should be about. Like, we want all the viewers to come away with their own idea of Bertram.
Yeah, exactly. I think I really like the idea that Bertram has some sort of like really solemn war history where he's actually been through some stuff. Because my gut feeling was just that Bertram is kind of this he speaks slowly, calmly. He's kind of it seems like there's a level of pain behind his voice when he speaks. I feel like when you're talking to Bertram...
It feels like he ought to have a cigarette in his mouth, and he's and at some point in the conversation, he'd say something that would be, like, too intense.
Yeah.
And then he'd be like, yeah, sorry.
No, the way I picture Bertram talking is like, he's got this kind of like, I imagine he sounds maybe something like this, he's not like... He doesn't, look, I don't think he has a kind of like the same accent that Harry and Bert have. I think he more, he has a little bit more of a neutral accent where he doesn't, he kind of speaks like, almost like his voice is a little bit worn out, and he doesn't, like that sort of thing. I picture him kind of talking like that.
I've come to hunt you down. So I'm constructing a Bertram ideal in my mind. I definitely think the scrap element should be there. I love the element of a darker past and whatnot. There is one thing we have to address, the elephant in the room.
What?
For Bertram, do you see him as a tank engine or a tender engine?
Oh. I honestly don't know. Because I love both. Whatever the answer is, I will say that tender engine or tank engine, I would like to include some kind of like red accents that the wooden railway model includes.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the actual model does have it.
Does it?
Yeah, look on the wiki. It does have the red accent.
Let me look at this. Bertram.
Oh my goodness.
What?
I figured something out. You know why in the wooden railway version, instead of the nameplate, it just has a weird looking letter L?
Yes?
It's the shadow of the nameplate.
Wait.
Look at the picture of Bertram from, like, afar.
Wait.
It's the shadow of the nameplate.
Oh! Oh, no!
I just thought they put a letter L on
Wait!
for no reason.
But that's so dumb, though! Wait. But... Hold on, no! But the wooden railway model was designed first, wasn't it?
No.
So, this is deeply frustrating.
This devolved.
It's so dumb.
That's disappointing. But anyway.
I'm glad I'm not the only one who noticed that L and thought it was weird.
Yeah, I was like, L?
What does it stand for?
Taking an L.
He's a loser.
What was I even going to say? Oh, yeah. So, that bombshell aside, there we go. There's the Halloween episode. We found something that just terrified us.
Yeah.
But, I think that it would be cool if maybe Bertram, at least for my purposes, at least for my recently invented theory that he was in World War I, maybe he was a tank engine at one point and then a tender engine.
That's possible. I feel like then he should start as a tender engine and turn into a tank engine, though. Because it would be weird if he started out as an unrelated tank engine and then turned into Duke. Like,
yeah.
That would be a weird thing to happen. It's like, oh, just by chance, it looks just like Duke. Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really do love, though, like Wooden Railway had the guts to just make up some stuff out of the blue. And one of the things I love is that they made up that Bertram was like this scrap engine. Like that he pulled scrap cars. It's possible. There are two ways about it, I think. One of them is that the reason we don't see any association with Bertram and scrap in the episode is because it's something that comes afterward. Like the mine and castle reopened, but later Bertram is reallocated to like Croc's scrapyard or the smelters or something. That would actually be kind of neat. Imagine if like Bertram got reallocated to the smelters, and so now you have this weird situation with Ari and Bert. Maybe the Fat Controller even sends Bertram there on purpose to try to teach them a lesson. Like Bertram has the iron will, and he's also a steam engine, so he kind of whips them into shape. And then they start kind of having more compassion for steam engines because Bertram just scares the ever-loving...
He just scares them severely.
Yeah, it's like... I mean, it really just, like... I think that could be a lot of fun.
Here's something funny. The wiki says that Bertram is an old narrow-gauge tank tender engine.
Tank tender? I mean, technically...
Yeah. And here's what his biography says from the wiki, so I don't know where they got the source from. Bertram used to work in the mines near the Minnesota Railway in Tidmouth Bay. Bertram was later restored. Huh.
They just made that up. The wiki just makes stuff up sometimes. Like, yeah, I guess he would have to be restored, right, to work properly again. But like they like. That's not new information. That's just like an inference that anybody could make.
Wait a minute.
The wiki... I don't like when the wiki does stuff like that, where they just say something...
Wait a minute.
And they're like, well, we have to be right about it, so we're going to write it. And it's like,
wait a minute.
What?
Thomas knew about Bertram.
That's weird.
Thomas knew about Bertram. Beware the ghost, Toby. What ghost? The old warrior ghost. Every night he lights his fire, then goes hunting.
I'm deeply unsettled by that, because it also would make sense that Thomas has been on the island longer than any of the other engines.
Thomas knows Bertram.
Oh.
Hold up.
It could even be that Thomas has gone down, because the thing is, because it could be that Duck's branch line has existed since the Northwestern Railway first formed, because it was built as part of the coastal defense. And
this is cool.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, and it's always operated trains to some degree, but like very rarely for a lot of its existence until it was reopened for Duck. And so it could be that Thomas went down there every now and then. He would have been way more likely to in the early days when he first arrived because there were so few engines.
Right.
And so it's quite possible that he went down there every once in a while, and maybe that's how he met Bertram. It's like that Bertram's line is somewhere along Duck's branch line, and that Thomas, there's some story we haven't seen, some occurrence where the two of them first met.
And then Thomas had the gall.
I know.
To just say, to make this whole thing about him being an old warrior ghost that goes hunting.
And it's clear that Thomas is just being mean to Toby and just teasing him. Because, like, he's smiling the whole time. And then he's like, goodbye, Toby, and he just leaves. And it's like, well, Thomas.
Get back here.
It's almost as bad. Like, he's almost messing with Bertram as much as he is messing with Toby. Because now Bertram's going to have to explain, no, I'm not a murderer, I just...
And then there's a moment where Thomas is talking to Bertram, and he's like, beware the old tram engine. Every night he lights his fire, then goes hunting.
Oh my god.
Both of them are just like, oh.
My timeline then for Bertram, to recap, based on everything we've talked about, my feeling is kind of that Bertram... It
says he was built circa 1879.
I guess that's when the Welsh ponies were built, I guess.
What's the name of the class?
Welsh pony.
Welsh pony. So it seems like the build date of these engines was 1863 to 1867.
So my timeline then for Bertram would be, so you've got the three engines, you've got Little Barford, you've got Sydney, and you've got Bertram. Then Bertram goes off to the war, then comes back, and then a little bit later that railway closes. And depending on when it closes, either what happens is Sydney and Little Barford are scrapped, and Bertram is the only remaining engine. And so Sydney and Little Barford's stories take place, like, before they were scrapped. Like, maybe they were scrapped in, like, the 50s or something. And maybe even that the whole start of Bertram's scrap kind of association is that he was forced to take them to the scrapyard. Maybe, like, he's not the bad guy there. Maybe he just has no choice but to take them there. But like, you know, that would be a really cool start for him. And it, like, and that plus the war desensitized him to scrap. So then, after his railway is closed, it's reopened years later as a tourist thing when Toby finds him. And then maybe 2 or 3 years after that, Bertram is maybe not feeling useful or his life isn't meaningful being a tourist, you know, engine. So they move him to the ironworks. Because the Fat Controller knows that Bertram can whip Arry and Bert into shape, right? And at first they think, like, oh, look at this pesky little engine. He's not going to be able to change our minds. And then that rat. But then Bertram is like, you know, actually manages to really spook them and whip them into shape. And, you know, he's actually, like, despite his size, he's really kind of a very intimidating engine. And also, I like the idea of there being a lot of narrow gauge lines all around the scrapyard. Which could really help with moving scrap. But also, it would allow Bertram to have a lot more access to Arry and Bert, so he could pop up any place he wanted and really just scare them a lot, and really just be pretty spooky. And it's like,
it seems like he's everywhere. He can get into any nook and cranny. I don't know if he's listening to us right now. Is he gonna hunt us down?
And it's like, you know, he's scaring them, even though Arry and Bert have scrapped engines before. They're scared of getting scrapped by Bertram. I think that would actually be a really amazing thing to do with Bertram.
He's just behind him and he just goes, boo.
Yeah, exactly. And the two of them are terrified. And then Bertram's like the hero of all the steam engines on Sodor. That would be really great. I would love to see Bertram, because the thing is, like, we know he works for the Sodor Scrap Company or whatever. In my mind, that's like the main scrapyard on Sodor isn't Croc's scrapyard. It's the smelters, the ironworks, whatever you want to call it. The Sodor Ironworks, right? That's where all the scrap really is. And I picture that's like at Kildane or something, like in the center of the island. And, you know, that's where Arry and Bert work. Because they're like the main scrap engines on Sodor. That's the main scrapyard. And so I love the idea of Bertram having his own little lines around there to kind of maneuver about. The fact that Bertram could back right up to that big red smelters pit in Magic Railroad, and like that, you know, he would be able to get all around there. A lot like how Victor gets around the steamworks. It would be a really cool idea for Bertram, so I would love to see that.
This is fascinating. Palmer, so before 1880, so there's two distinctions within the class. There's George England class is what they're called, I think. The first four, Princess, Prince, Mountaineer, and Palmerston, were all built as side tanks.
Oh, okay.
They were all later rebuilt. Those are called the Small Englands, the four of them.
Small
and then
Englands.
the two later ones, Welsh Pony and Little Giant, were both built in 1867. They both were built with saddle tanks, and they were called the Large Englands.
Okay.
If Duke and Bertram are Large Englands, then they would have a longer wheelbase, larger driving wheels, and they may not have had cabs when they were built.
Interesting.
If you go and look up Welsh Pony in like the early years, it looks kind of like Skarloey's cabless situation.
Huh. Yeah, that's interesting. So,
Well, it has like that panel instead of the full cab.
yeah.
Oh,
I've seen that actually. Yeah,
Yeah.
That's weird.
So
got, like, a
that makes me think
windshield.
about Bertram. Yeah, that makes me think about Bertram's operational history.
Yeah. I like the idea of Bertram having a very kind of complicated history that has a lot of different changes and like a lot. He's been through a lot and he's seen a lot and he's changed a lot. And so
Maybe
it would
he
be
was
cool.
built with side tanks or something. Maybe he's one of the Small Englands.
Yeah, it could be something like that. Oh, you know what I really like that I just thought of? What if, because I'm kind of attached to the idea now that eventually Bertram goes to the Ironworks and works there after he's found by Toby. What if that's the point where they rebuild him? And then that's when he loses the tender and he's a tank engine. So he starts out as the tender engine, like we've been talking. Then he turns into this tank engine when he gets there, which explains why the wooden railway version with the scrap cars is that as well, because that's his scrapyard version. And so that's kind of the association there. Whereas, like before that. Yeah, and I like that as well. So, okay, so let's go over... So I think we're just about ready to wrap up on Bertram.
Yeah.
But I want to go over the final timeline that we kind of have assembled clumsily throughout this whole process.
This is cool because, with Daisy and Salty and, in your previous episode with Skarloey,
Yeah.
their chronology is more or less set.
Yeah, no, there's really nothing to kind of figure out there.
So much more of it is inferable.
Yeah.
At least if there's something missing with Salty, it's like, oh, okay, just look in the 50s.
Yeah, exactly.
But with Bertram, there's so much more to construct, and so this is a unique episode. We've never had an episode like this before.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. It allows us to really make up a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
So Bertram. So let's see. So when do you think he was built then? So if he started out as
The Large Englands were built in 1867.
Let's just say he's a Large England then to start. But did those start without the cab?
They started without cabs.
All right. So let's say that Bertram started out in 1867 as a Large England.
They did have the saddle tanks, though.
Yeah.
They always had them.
Yeah, okay. So he started out as a Large England with a saddle tank with no cab, sent to Sodor in 1867 or whatever to work a railway that was nearby Duxbranch, which maybe explains... Maybe the reason that the railway failed was because they built Duxbranch alongside the coast, and so now there was no purpose for it anymore. Like, because I could see that happening, where like you've got a small narrow gauge railway there that was there already. Maybe
and it couldn't last. Unlike the Mid Sodor, it stood no chance.
Yeah, exactly.
From the get go.
And so it just it just kind of faded away. It kind of struggled valiantly for a few years, but then started to disappear. Maybe there's like a mine there or something that like maybe there's an extra mine and castle that are there that aren't there on the Railway Series map. That we just add there because we have that power because we are the gods of this world. But basically so Bertram is sent to Sodor in 1867. Doesn't have a cab yet, but it's pretty much the same as he looks in the TV series. And he's eventually Sydney and Little Barford show up as well. And maybe this railway runs, to an extent alongside Little Western. And, maybe it runs up to, like, the Cloud Factory or something, which is where Little Barford works. And so essentially, the three...
in the cloud.
so the three of them work on this line. And then at some point, it starts to close down. And either what happens is that Sydney and Little Barford are scrapped, and that their stories in the magazines take place before then, or it's that they are sent to other railways. So maybe the three of them all start out on this railway, but then Little Barford and Sydney get sent off somewhere else. So, like, maybe Little Barford goes to, like, the Cloud Factory or something, which is somewhere else. Maybe that's in, like, Vicarstown, and there's,
I think that the Cloud Factory, is that real? I think that it's at the power station.
Yeah.
Here's all we know about the episode. Gordon calls Percy small, of course. Then both Percy and Gordon take an urgent load of coal to the power station. Whilst there, they see a small purple tank engine, and Percy is reassured that he is medium sized.
So when I say power station, I think Peel Godred. So so that's probably at the end of the Peel Godred branch, which would probably
yeah, it actually says it is.
So I could see maybe what happens is that Little Barford starts out on that line along with Bertram and Sydney, but then he's relocated to he's like sold off to the power station, and he works there now in the modern day. And so there's just a small narrow gauge line there where he shunts and stuff. And then you've got maybe Sydney gets scrapped or something, like he doesn't make it. And then Bertram is the only one who's left there.
It's a shame because it throws wrenches in, I guess, the magazine stories that they come from. Well, not Little Barford, but Sydney it does.
Well, I mean, it does and it doesn't. It depends, right? If they were scrapped in the 60s or in the late 50s, I don't think that would mess with anything. Because,
true.
Sydney needs to meet Duck, right?
Yeah, Sydney runs the Scenic Railway. His first story is called Duck's Best Friend.
That's interesting.
Duck meets a small blue tank engine named Sydney who runs the narrow gauge branch line near the seaside, and then the Scenic Railway has a lot more to it, actually. Duck is to collect a new engine and take to a scenic railway at the holiday camp. Sydney, the engine, begins to boast how amazing the views from his railway will be. Duck argues back, saying that his line is more picturesque.
Oh, I just had a thought. What if Sydney comes to the railway after it's reopened to replace Bertram, who then goes to the ironworks? Like, that would make sense because it's opened up as this tourist thing, right? So maybe originally,
it's at the holiday camp. I guess it could be anywhere.
I'm almost wondering if it like runs by Hulltroff or something. Maybe what happens is it's like so it starts out with just Bertram and Little Barford. Then Little Barford gets sold to the power station, and so Bertram's the only one on the railway, all alone. And then it closes down, and then it reopens, and then Bertram isn't happy being a tourist engine. So then he gets sent to the ironworks to put Arion Burton line, and he's replaced by Sydney, who then comes to the railway to take his place to operate the scenic coastal route. And so that's basically what happens there.
Yeah.
And so then modern day, Bertram is then, he's turned it from a tender engine into a tank engine, maybe because it's more convenient to maneuver around the ironworks or whatever. And so they turn him into that. They add all the red accents and stuff like that, and so he looks a lot like the wooden railway model. He puts Arion Burt in line. He actually makes a significant change in their behavior. In a story like this, you'd even hear a really cool line, like, the Fat Controller's like, Bertram's literally the only steam engine on the island tough enough to work here. Like, nobody else can handle it. Like, it's literally just him.
And it's funny, because it also correlates with Arion Burt in the show, because it's like, whenever Arion Burt are not there, they're being mean to the engines.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like...
And they're taking any... Because Bertram, of course, is not standard gauge, so they're taking any time that they could be away from the ironworks to mean the other engines.
Like maybe that's why we never see them like because it's like we see them in the ironworks.
The only time that we see them being like mean in the ironworks is when Fergus arrives.
Yeah, I know. They're like, "Are you happy to be here?"
And maybe Bertram's not in that day.
Yeah, and also the scene in Halloween where they're kind of playing a prank on him. But I almost wonder if Bertram thinks Thomas and Emily deserve it and is in on it. I could see that. I could see Bertram kind of having that sense of justice where he's just like, all right, teach him a lesson. Like, I think Bertram's a real tough engine. I really love the idea that the Fat Controller literally installs a narrow gauge line at the ironworks, just because he literally couldn't find any other engine tough enough So the only alternative he had was to put in narrow gauge lines specifically because he has no other choice than Bertram. Like, no one else can handle the ironworks but him.
He makes the track dual gauge.
That would be interesting. I think parts of it would be. I think the closest thing to model it off of, though, would be the Steamworks, where you've got kind of parts where narrow gauge lines cross over standard gauge ones, and they kind of run parallel sometimes, and you've got your own kind of sections where the narrow gauge lines go, standard gauge lines don't. And it would give Bertram just the ability to go places that Arian Bert couldn't. He would be able to do a lot more, he'd have a lot more mobility, and he could it'd be easier for him to kind of mess with the two of them than it would be for them to mess with him. Like, he's got all these hiding places, and they don't have any. So it's like, because they've got, like, 3 lines leading in, and that's it.
Yeah. Well, I've got to say, this has been a very illuminating discussion.
Yeah, really. I think we've come up with a lot of stuff to kind of pull out of Bertram, where it's just like, because the thing is, we get very little about him in the episode, in the character cards and stuff. But what little they do give us, I think, is very interesting and leads to some interesting discussion and there's just so many ideas that you could come up with to pull out of that.
Absolutely.
And I really love the ones that we've come up with.
Right, and it doesn't feel like anything about Bertram has been, like, sacrificed to do it. We've completely taken Bertram. Like, he's so great because, I'm just jazzed about the fact that I'm picturing Bertram without a cap. I'm picturing him when he was just built. For my personal purposes, I'm picturing him, like, in World War I. Like, that's awesome.
You know what would be a cool idea is what if he was, like, a different color at some point, too? What if,
I'd
his
love
old
to see
railway,
his evolution.
You know what would be kind of neat is what if, like, you did a slightly different spin on it, and instead of being dark brown, it's really that he's just so caked with rust that he's like, he looks dark brown, but really he used to be purple like Little Barford, and that was the color of their railway, so they both, like, were painted that way. Like, something like that. That would be really neat.
That would be cool. I'm kind of attached to the dark brown.
Yeah, I mean, I would want him to be like that when he gets to the ironworks is the thing, and it would be weird if he was purple, rusted brown, and then they repainted him to a color that was of...
Yeah. No, that's the thing, is, like, that would be cool. Like, yeah. I imagine Bertram is, like, just really cool aesthetically, because I'm thinking of all the different shapes and liveries he might have.
Yeah.
So that is cool for part of his life.
He's got this really interesting history, where there's, like, a lot of stuff that's happened in his lifetime. The fact that he went through the war, he's worked on 2 different parts of the island, one where it was his old railway, the other being the ironworks, the fact that he's gone through like 3 or 4 different shapes, the fact that he's just like, and overall, I think he'd be a really tough character, one of the toughest on the whole island, where he's really he's fearless, he's been through so much that at this point, it's just like nothing phases him. He would really be he'd be able to whip anybody into shape, but at the same time I don't think he'd be as judgmental as Duke. I don't think he would be as picky.
No.
I think that he would have so much perspective after all the stuff that he's endured, after going through everything, that he would after seeing his railway close, losing friends, and going through the war, all that stuff. I think that he would have a lot more perspective and know what's really important in life and not be as picky and petty as Duke is. He's really tough and can be very intimidating, but he would never intimidate somebody if he didn't have to, if it wasn't a good idea. Like, he's going to go in, and he's just going to stick it to Arian Bert. He's really going to scare the bearings off of them, just because he knows that the island needs this. They need to be whipped into shape, because they're a threat to everybody, right? But, like, somebody else, like, I don't think Bertram, if he was like with Duncan, he wouldn't even waste his time on Duncan. He'd just chill with him. He'd be like, they'd have a good conversation, and Bertram wouldn't get caught up in like the little kind of insulting things that Duncan would say, because it's like not a big deal, right? I'm going to stand up to the real bullies. I'm going to be a warrior for those who actually need help, and I'm going to be a warrior against the engines that are actually a problem. I'm not going to worry about somebody who just says a few cuss words or whatever. I don't care, right? I think that's Bertram. I think that Bertram doesn't get caught up in the minutia. I think he cares about the important stuff because he's been through a lot, been through a great deal, and so he's really tough. He only really stands up to somebody or speaks when he really has something important to say. And, he's just overall a really tough, brave, and pretty heroic, considering the Arian Bert situation you could potentially pull off, engine. So I think he's great for all those reasons, and I think that there's so much you could do with him if you wanted to.
You know, I have to say, I'm really glad that we chose Bertram for this episode.
Yeah.
We were close to doing Smudger.
Yeah, we were thinking about doing Smudger, but it's just Bertram felt more like a Halloween type character.
Yeah. And no disrespect to Smudger. I love him and we'll probably get to him at some point. But it's just this, I think, was a lot more fascinating. And I needed to get, like, really invested into Bertram because it's easy for me to get excited about Smudger.
Yeah, but, like, Bertram I've kind of been avoiding because there's so much to figure out about him. And it's like, I mean, we've done it now. We've figured out a lot of stuff, and I really love what we came up with. It's atrocious. It's atrocious from a Matt perspective. I mean, like Ted is gonna have a heart attack if he ever listens to this. But
this makes me want to go out and make like customs of Bertram at each stage of his life, and that's what I really need. You know?
Yeah, that's
so.
Awesome.
This was definitely a great discussion. This is one of my favorites thus far, if not my favorite.
Yeah, this has been great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that's all we've got to say about Bertram. And there's tons of different ways you could interpret him, tons of different directions you could take him in.
Right. I definitely want to know what you guys think about Bertram.
Yeah. What are like your Bertram theories? What do you guys do? You guys agree with it? Do you guys have your own take? You know, what is like where would you take Bertram?
Yeah, I'm very excited to see that.
Yeah. All right. Well, so that's been our take on Bertram. Happy Halloween,
Happy
everybody.
Halloween.
Thank you very much for watching. And this has been Character Gallery. See you next time.
See you guys.
Woo! We did it. And it's only an hour and 20 minutes long.
Oh, no.